Good morning. This morning we will be reading from The Ranger's Apprentice by John Flanagan. It was a story I read to my children when they were younger. Try to eat something, Will. Tomorrow is a big day after all. Jeanie, a blonde, pretty, and cheerful young lady, gestured towards Will's barely touched plate and smiled encouragingly at him. He made an attempt to return the smile, but it was a dismal failure. He picked up the plate before him, piled high with his favorite foods. Tonight his stomach knotted tight with tension and anticipation. He could hardly bring himself to swallow a bite. Tomorrow would be a big day, he knew. He knew it all too well, in fact. Tomorrow is the biggest day in his life because tomorrow was choosing day, and it would determine how he would spend the rest of his life. Nerves, I imagine, said George, setting down his loaded fork and seizing the lapels of his jacket in a judicious manner. He was a thin, gangly, and studious boy, fascinated by rules and regulations, and with the penchant for examining and debating both sides of a question, sometimes at great length. Dreadful thing, that nervousness. It can just freeze you up so you can't think, can't eat, and can't speak. I'm not nervous, said Will quickly, noticing that Horace had looked up, ready to form a sarcastic comment. George nodded several times, considering Will's statement. On the other hand, he added, a little nervousness can actually improve performance. It can heighten your perceptions and sharpen your reactions. So that if you're worried, in fact, you are, it is not necessarily something to be worried about, of itself, so to speak. In spite of himself, a wiry smile touched Will's mouth. George could be a natural in the legal profession, he thought. He would almost certainly be the scribe master's choice on the following morning. Perhaps Will thought that that was the heart of his own problem. He was the only one of his ward mates who had any fears about choosing that would take place within 12 hours. He ought to be nervous, scoffed Horace. After all, which craft master is going to want him as an apprentice? I'm sure we're all nervous, Alice said. She directed one of her rare smiles at Will. We'd be stupid not to be. Well, I'm not, said Horace, then reddened as Alice raised one eyebrow and Jeanie giggled. It was typical of Alice, Will thought. He knew that the tall, graceful girl had already been promised a place as an apprentice by Lady Pauline, head of the Castle Redmont's diplomatic service. Her pretense that she was nervous about the following day and her tact in refraining from pointing out Horace's gaffe showed that she was already a diplomat of some skill. Jeanie, of course, would gravitate immediately to the castle's kitchens, the domain of Master Chubb, Redmont's head chef. He was a man of renown throughout the kingdom for banquets served in the castle's massive dining hall. Jeanie loved food and cooking, and her easygoing nature and unfailing good humor would make her an invaluable staff member in the turmoil of the castle's kitchens. Battle school would be Horace's choice. Will glanced at his ward mate now, hungrily tucking into the roasted turkey, ham, and potatoes that were heaped on his plate. Horace was big for his age and a natural athlete. The chances that he would be refused were virtually non existent. Horace was exactly the type of recruit that Sir Rodney looked for in his warrior apprentices. Strong, athletic, fit, and, thought Will a trifle sourly, not too bright. Battle school was the path to knighthood for boys like Horace, born commoners, but with physical abilities to serve the knights of the kingdom. Which left Will. What would his choice be? More importantly, as Horace pointed out, what craftmaster would accept him as an apprentice? For choosing day, it was a pivotal point in the life of a castle ward. They were orphaned children raised by the generosity of Baron Arald, the lord of the Redmont fief. For the most part, their parents had died in the service of the fief, and the Baron saw that it was his responsibility to care for and raise the children of his former subjects, to give them an opportunity to improve their station in life whenever possible. Choosing Day was that responsibility and opportunity. Each year, castle wards turning 15 could apply to be apprenticed to the master of the various craft that served the castle and its people. Ordinarily, craft apprentices were selected by the dint of their parents' occupations or influenced with their craft masters. Castle wards usually had no such influence, and this was their chance to win a future for themselves. Those wards who were not chosen, or for whom no opening could be found, would be assigned to farming families in the nearby village, providing farm labor to raise crops and animals that fed the castle's inhabitants. It was rare for this to happen, Will knew. The Baron and his craft masters usually went out of their way to fit the wards into one craft or another, but it could happen, and it was a fate he feared more than anything. Horace caught his eye now and gave a smug smile. "Still planning to apply for battle school, Will?" he asked through a mouthful of turkey and potatoes. "Better eat something, then. You'll need to build yourself up a little." He snorted with laughter, and Will glowered at him. A few weeks previous, Horace had overheard Will confiding in Alice that he desperately wanted to be selected for battle school, and he has made Will's life a living misery ever since, pointing out on every possible occasion that Will's slight build was totally suited for the rigors of battle school training. The fact that Horace was probably right only made it worse. Where Horace was tall and muscular, Will was small and wiry. He was agile and fast and surprisingly strong, but he simply didn't have the size that he knew was required of battle school apprentices. He hoped against hope for the past few years that he would have what people called his growing spurt before the choosing day came around, but it had never happened, and now the day was nearly here. As Will said nothing, Horace sensed that he had scored a verbal hit. This was a rarity in their turbulent relationship. Over the past few years, he and Will had clashed repeatedly. Being the stronger of the two, Horace usually got the better of Will, although occasionally Will's speed and agility would allow him to get a surprising punch or kick in and then escape before Horace could get him. But while Horace generally had the best of their physical clashes, it was unusual for him to win in any of their verbal encounters. Will's wit was as agile as the rest of him, and he almost always managed to get the last word. In fact, it was a tendency that often led to trouble between them. Will was yet to have learned that having the last word was not always a good idea. Horace decided to press this advantage. "You need muscles to get into battle school, Will. Real muscles." Glancing at the others at the table to see if anyone disagreed, the other wards, uncomfortable with the growing tension between the two, concentrated on their plates. "Particularly between the ears," Will replied, and unfortunately Jeanie couldn't refrain from giggling. Horace's face flushed as he started to rise from his seat, but Will was quicker and was already out the door before Horace could get out of his chair. He contented himself with a final insult after his retreating wardmate. "That's right, run away, Will No Name. You are a no name, and nobody will want you as an apprentice." And that concludes our reading for today. Thank you.